Assalamu alaikum. This is Brother Ali, and we're coming back together again for another session around conflict resolution. So, I've given over the past few sessions, I've given a lot of information. And so, what I'd like to do here in this particular session is bring everything together. So it's kind of like building a car. I might have delivered the wheels to you, maybe delivered the doors to you, maybe even dropped off an engine to you, and you have all these different pieces of a car, but it still doesn't make it drive. And so we want to start putting all this together that I've given you, and we're going to put it together so now we can actually drive this vehicle of helping our youth resolve conflicts when they come up. So going back to the very beginning, we talked about the brain. So I wanted to really just help our youth understand that emotions such as anger, stress, depression, all of those emotions that come about all come from how the brain is processing. And oftentimes in conflict, the brain is going into a fear mode. So we talked about the hippocampus, which is the memory part of the brain. So when something negative happens, the hippocampus wants us to remember that, so it stores that memory. So it's kind of that red flag. So if something stirs up again, the hippocampus will bring up that memory to let the person know, say, hey, I remember this happened before, it was unpleasant, didn't like it, and I want to get away from it. Or it might be this memory was unpleasant, now it angers me, and now I want to aggressively attack at it. So that's what the hippocampus does. I talked about the amygdala, which is the processes the fear response. It's about the size of an almond. And it really, under a microscope, when people dissect brains, it looks like a very small, minute piece of the brain because it's so small. But the amygdala is actually the fear response of our brain. We talked about the vagus nerve and how the brain is communicating with the organs. So when we get a student that's upset, they might be visibly shaking, their tummies might be upset, their heart is racing, you'll notice shallow breathing, and all of this is the amygdala asking the vagus nerve to go down to these organs and respond because there's a stress, because there is an issue. So we want to normalize when we have our students that we're working with, our kids that we're working with, and they're coming to us and they're upset, they're angry, something's going on, we want to normalize it. Just let them know, maybe you can empathize with them, maybe you can see their point of view. You just let them, just let them know that, hey, I can see why you're upset. Let's kind of talk about what's going on. So we want to definitely normalize it, but then we want to start actually getting them to verbalize what is going on, so you can help them resolve or at least mediate some conflict. Also, too, we want to encourage our youth to address the stresses, not ignore the stresses that they come into. So conflicts for some, because many might have siblings, they might be used to conflicts. So, but if I have an only child who there's maybe not a lot of conflicts that they've had to maneuver or manage, when they get into a conflict with a friend or a peer, it can be very upsetting. So that's one of the things that we want to teach, because often too, those who are not used to conflict will avoid and or run away from conflict. And so that's something that we do not want to teach. We actually want to teach And we're going to get into this when we start talking about boundaries again. So I'm going to review what boundaries are. But yeah, we want them to address the stresses. So as we're trying to calm our students when they come to us, one of the techniques I gave you is PER, which is pause, reflect, and respond. And because oftentimes the child, oftentimes we're dealing with children 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and all they want to do is have an emotional response before they kind of process or think about what should happen or what needs to happen. And so children are emotional creatures. And so we want to help teach them that before you react, we need to pause. We need to think about what's happening. You know, was it done on purpose? Was it done in an aggressive manner to you? And then how should we respond to it? Do we defend ourselves by pushing or shoving? Or do we verbally, inquire what's happening? And so yeah, this is all goes back to how the brain is being developed inside of a child, and that's where maturity comes in. And so we're actually trying to teach maturity. My apologies, alhamdulillah, shukr, I'm getting over the flu, so forgive me for my throat and any coughing that you might hear. So yeah, we want to just help our students pause and reflect before they respond. All right, so reflection is actually the key, and so we want them to get to reflect so they can engage their rational brain, which is the front part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. Because when the amygdala is involved, that's the back part of the brain, that's where the emotional part of the brain comes into. It wants to take over. And so what we need to do is when we get dialogue starting, that's where conversations is really, really positive. We get that front part of the brain working again. So when we do get a student that's really upset and they're just in a state where they can't calm themselves, we talked about a particular type of breathing. It's deep breathing, but it's called combat breathing. And if you haven't heard this lecture, you can go back to the original first one and really walk through what combat breathing is. But it's breathing in a way that paramedics, firefighters, police officers, military personnel, they're all trained in this stress relieving breathing. And really what it does is it regulates the heart, because we need to slow the heart down, especially in stressful situations. And then also too, it gets a lot of oxygen to the front part of the brain, so we can engage the prefrontal cortex. And so the deep breathing exercise is inhaling as much as you possibly can for 2 to 3 seconds, holding that breath for 2 to 3 seconds, and then releasing that breath for 2 to 3 seconds. And you do this activity for about 45 seconds to a minute, maybe more if needed. And you will actually see someone calm down when you actually do this exercise. I've seen it countless of times. I practice it with my students when I'm at work, and it absolutely works. So we're also teaching that anger is an obstacle that we need to navigate. We don't need to let it block us or stop us or run away from this obstacle. We want to navigate what angered us. So the fact is that anger can be managed. We're not trying to get rid of it. We're just trying to manage it. And so how do we manage it? A lot of it is things that maybe they can control themselves. So sleep and fatigue are a big issue when it comes to children and the emotional state. So we want to talk to the parents. We want to talk to the child too, just about how are you doing? Are you a sleepy child? Because a sleepy child can be an irritable child. So we want to make sure are they coming to your group exhausted? are they coming to your group or your class with a minimum to no sleep at all? So yeah, these are some of the things. And then talked about a couple other things that really work on our emotional level, which is eating. So a hungry child could be an angry child. So oftentimes I'll keep a little granola bars or something in my desk, and I might have a student that comes in irritable. The first thing I'll ask them, did you eat breakfast this morning? And oftentimes, more so than not, they'll say, no, I ran out of the house, I didn't get a chance to eat. And I'll offer a granola bar, and they'll often take it, and then they'll eat it as we're talking. And it's amazing because within 5 minutes, I see a calmness, and it goes into me engaging their prefrontal cortex in conversation, but also to maybe they're a little irritable because they're a little hungry, and that's making them angry. So I covered how no is actually a good word. So this is one of the biggest reasons where conflict comes in, and especially when it comes to the adolescents, because children are very egocentric, very egotistical, and it's all about three people: me, myself, and I. And so oftentimes children do not like to be told no, whether it's by a parent, whether it's by a teacher, whether it's by a peer, or whether it's by one of their best friends. When no comes into play, oftentimes you will see a child react in a negative way. And so we want to talk about that no is okay. We want to teach that you can actually receive no, and you can actually give no. So giving no is maybe someone's best friend wants to borrow their soccer ball for the weekend, and that student's like, no, I don't want you to borrow it. I want to play with it, so no, you can't. And maybe the first student or first kid gets very upset because they really wanted to borrow that ball. So no is okay to give, and so we want to talk about, when we set boundaries, no is a boundary. And so, but also too, we gotta help our students understand that they need to be receiving the word no too. Just because they want to spend a night over their little friend's house on the weekend, and mom and dad say no, they have to be able to regulate and understand that, hey, I'm not happy about it, but I have to understand that mom and dad, I have to listen to them. And the more we kind of talk about the receiving of no and understanding contextually where that no was coming from, and that's where a lot of my work comes in, trying to explain the other side of why that person might be saying no, really builds up a little bit more of understanding, but also empathy. So I get a lot of my teachers that say that, my child doesn't show any, and my student doesn't show any empathy, or I get parents that tell me, my student, my child is not showing any empathy. And so this is something that will help in regards to that. But it's about having the discussion. It's about helping the child see the other point of view, not their point of view. So we talked about actually setting up boundaries, and no as being one of those boundaries, but also people pushing on boundaries where maybe their friends really want something from them. They said no, but the other student continues to persist and try to wear them down. And as they continue to wear them down, sometimes they change their no to a yes, and all of a sudden now they're upset because they said yes, but they meant to say no, and now they're upset. So it's okay for someone to say no and hold that no. And because no is such an emotionally triggering word, we have to understand when we deliver it or give that word no, there's no emotion attached to it. There's no yelling, there's no screaming, there's no hollering. And when we say no, it's just no, and that's it. And we can explain why we're saying no, but we got to be very clear that when you say no, you have to be very clear that it's okay to hold it. But sometimes, we get worn down, or maybe our kids get worn down and they change their no to a yes. We gotta let them know that it's okay to go back later and change that yes back to a no. And it's about having a conversation and letting them know that, yeah, this time I let you borrow my soccer ball, but the next time, you know what, I'm not going to let you borrow it. I don't like to lend my things out. Maybe some students are like this, where they don't like to let other people borrow their things. And so I said yes this time, but in the future it's now no. And parents can use this, adults can use this. So this is a great way to resolving conflicts. And they say that the old adage is communication is the key, and it absolutely is. So it's the way we speak, the way we communicate, and the way we let people know where our boundaries are, and letting them know in a very clear but very kind way. And so setting up boundaries, you do it in a very clear, in a very kind way. So I covered communication, and really it's the communication between two people, and how relationships can go up and down. And so I talked about 80-20 is a percentage of 80% of the time in a good, healthy relationship, things are good. 20%, there's just issues, but they're not major issues. We're not talking about relationship breaking issues, but 20% of the time there's some disagreements, there's some attitude, there's some eye rolling, there's some huffing and puffing, and that's okay. So when it comes to bettering a relationship, because relationships can fall under 80-20, the first thing we want to do is look at the negative. We want to look at what the issues are and why are they coming up. And then we want some introspection. We want them to kind of look at themselves, and we always want to start with I. So what can I do to help this relationship before we look at the other person? Because again, children are very egocentric, and they want to point the finger and say, well, they need to do this, or they need to stop doing that, or they need to start doing this or that. Well, we want to shift it first, because that student might have a point, but we want to start with I first. And so that was what I call flashlight theory. So we want to shine the light on ourselves first, and then we'll shine the light on the other person. We're talking about types of conflict. So I kind of mentioned it. So we have interpersonal conflict, we have intrapersonal conflict, and then we have group conflicts. So I touched on those, and as I'm going through some of my notes, I wanted to make sure I focused on some of the practical conflict resolution skills. We're talking about active listening, and this is probably one of the biggest ones, and I would say I use this a vast majority of my day whenever there's an issue. And it could be a teacher-student issue, it could be a teacher-administrator issue, but I'll get someone that comes in my room, and it could be a child and their parent, and someone is upset that comes to me, and the first thing I'm doing is listening. So I have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I try to keep my mouth shut, and I try to keep my ears open, and I'm just going to listen. What brings you into my office today? What's happening? I can see you're upset. And then I let them tell me, and I actively listen. And actively listen is not being distracted while they're talking to you, not multitasking, not typing on the computer and glancing over in their direction as they're telling you a story. It's putting everything away and being completely 100% present in the conversation. And it's also whether you agree with their view or or their perspective or not. It's about just listening without responding. So that is truly what active listening is. So after you listen to what's kind of going on, or what's happening, or what initiated the anger response, or the stress response, then we can start reflecting. Maybe there's a lot of you blaming. Oh, they did this and they did that and he did that and she did that, and then we can start working with them, and we want to start by helping them with I statements. So I covered I statements, and really that's going back to that flashlight theory, where most of the time people want to shine the light on other people and highlight their wrongs. But what we want to do is teach them, let's start with I first. I feel is a great way to start. I feel hurt because what? Because so-and-so said they would do something and they didn't do it. Okay, so that is the way that we use I statements. And then we want to help with brainstorming solutions. So that's why they're coming to you, because they don't know what to do. So you, being separated from the issue, you have a better perspective, and maybe more of a mature perspective on maybe how they can approach this issue, this situation. Oftentimes I want to just let them know that if this is a relationship that you have to keep or want to keep, we want to address it. We do need to talk to that other person about what the problem is. So we talked about the role of conflicts in relationships, and I want to just normalize conflict, because my parents, my students, my teachers, they don't want any conflict whatsoever. But in all reality, conflict is a very natural part of all relationships. But there's rules when it comes to how we engage in conflict. So I call them fair fighting rules. So if you think of like two boxers in a boxing ring, now they're there to physically hurt each other to win. One person wants to win, the other person wants to win, but there's a third person in that ring, and it's the referee. And that referee is to make sure that there's some fair fighting or combat involved in this fight. So one might be they have to maintain gloves, so there's no permanent damage. One is you can't hit below the belt. So there's rules to conflict. Well, just in relationship, there's also a set of rules. Calling names, hurtful names, stealing, hitting, punching, pushing, physical contact. Those are off the table. We can't allow those to happen. So we have to teach there are rules when you are upset. And then we talked about being able to walk away. So this is a big one where, again, our children are very egocentric and ego-driven, and oftentimes walking away is very hard for them. Some children is very easy to walk away. They'd rather walk away because they just rather avoid conflict at all possible. But we're talking about students who actively engage in conflict, verbally or physical. We want to start teaching that walking away is one of the options that we need to address, because we might have to deal with this, but we might have to deal with it later, because one person or both are not in a position physically or mentally to handle working through whatever conflict there is. And the thing that we want to emphasize is what we say, we can't unsay. And sometimes what we do, we cannot undo. We can apologize, but just because you apologize does not mean that things are forgotten. And so this is the thing that I often tell my students: you can forgive, but you will never forget. And that just goes back to our beautiful brains, because when someone hurts us, our brain logs it in, stamps it in, and it's a memory that will often stay there for a lifetime. And oftentimes people break off relationships because of one wrong thing done to them. Well, if again, we gotta evaluate relationships. So we want to help our students evaluate relationships. And I always look at relationships that you have to keep or want to keep. So have to keeps, again, are family relationships. Those are have to keeps. Sibling relationships, parental relationships. Want to keeps are your friendships. Want to keeps are your marriages. Divorce is allowed in Islam. So there's not a have to keep, but it might be a want to keep. I want to keep married to this person, so we need to work through these conflicts. So helping your students also understanding, is this a relationship you want to be in? So if it's a friendship, do you want to be in this friendship? And if so, how can how can you make this better? And so that's the foundation. That's kind of where we start. That's kind of where we need to go with this. But one of the other things, once conflict has started and maybe people are in the middle of conflict, or the conflict just ended, and some people have been really hurt mentally and emotionally or physically, but they need to coexist. Maybe they need to stay in the same classroom, or they need to stay in the same family, or they need to stay at the same school campus. We have to think about restoring the relationship, and that's where restorative justice comes in. And so my next session, which is my last 30-minute session, will be talking about restorative justice. And it's about bringing two individuals together, or two parties together, who have had conflict, and where there have been people who have been hurt physically, emotionally, or mentally. And they need to kind of coexist, whether it's maintaining a relationship or not. So some people might have to coexist. They don't want to be on the same school campus, but they have no choice. But they don't want any conflict any longer. They don't want anything to continue on. And so that's when we bring the two parties together and we start talking about a restorative conversation about how to kind of bring two people who have harmed each other together and heal that harm. So some people call them harm circles. We call them RJ, which is restorative justice circles. And so it's bringing people who have been hurt together. And sometimes it's one person doing the hurting, and then we have the victim. But really, it's trying to heal the one who has been hurt, but also helping the other one understand what their role was in hurting that person or that group of people, and how not to do it again. So that'll be my next presentation. It's going to be just a short 30-minute restorative justice circle conversation, and maybe you can implement this in your groups if you find that you have some ongoing conflict with students that you're working with. So that was just a summary of all the sessions that I've done so far. And then the last one I'm so excited to do, which is the restorative justice circle. And so that will be the very final one. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. Just remember, you can always reach out to me if you want. My email is therapyfocused@gmail.com. So therapyfocused with a D, FOCUSED @gmail.com. And you can always email me. And if you just have further questions and you would like a phone call or a consultation, I would be happy to do that free of charge, no problem. And we can even have a texting conversation if needed. If you have some issues that you just need something a little bit deeper, a little bit more involved, I'd be more than happy to do that for you. So please keep me in your dua, and inshallah, I will have that last restorative justice presentation ready for you in a couple weeks. So thank you again for your time. Please keep me and my wife in your du'as, and inshallah, get ready for the next one. Okay, assalamu alaikum.